I'm Julia McAllister, and I'll be speaking with you today about Agile estimation that works. And often when I put Agile and estimation in the same sentence, I get some skeptical looks in the room. But hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have some techniques that you can bring back to your teams to at least start trying to estimate out some of your projects if it would help your teams in terms of aligning business and engineering goals. So as a way of introduction, I am currently the Chief Operating Officer at a company called Def Method. Def Method is a consultancy based out of this fine city, New York City. And to be clear, we are a software consultancy. So what that means is we work with clients ranging from small startups building out their MVPs to larger enterprises looking to augment their own staff. Due to this nature of our work, we oftentimes are trying to marry the business needs of our clients that we're working with alongside the engineering needs of our engineers that work at Def Method who are trying to build strong and sustainable products that are well tested and well documented. In marrying those business and engineering needs, one thing that has come up many times at Def Method is estimation. So when we kick off projects, we oftentimes have our client ask us questions like, what tech stack should I be using? And after some investigation into the product that they're looking to build, that's a pretty easy, recommendation for us to give to those clients. Those clients also will come to us and they'll say, well, when can I expect to have my lovely launch party? What date should I set for that launch party? How long will this take you to build out this application? And that's a little bit more difficult to predict. Now, what we could do is we could just say, well, let's see. I think it'll take about 3 months, and we'll just go ahead and get started developing, and we'll see exactly how long it takes. My argument is that I think that we shouldn't just throw out this process just because it's difficult. We should actually embrace it because it's difficult. We should grab the bull by the horns, or I don't think I'm supposed to say that anymore. So I think I'm supposed to say grab the rose by the thorns, cream and peanut. And we really should try to tackle this difficult challenge. I don't know how many of you have seen Boehm's Cone of Uncertainty, but at the start of projects, it is difficult to estimate, and it is difficult to determine roughly how long it will take to build a project. But we'll walk through a couple steps that we can take to try to get at least a better picture and a better sense of how long it could potentially take to build this product. So this is the process that we'll be reviewing today. It's a 5-step process: aligning the team, prioritizing your workflows, creating estimate ranges, prioritizing your user story estimates, and then finally refining those estimates as you go through the project. First step of the process is aligning the team. So let's use the example of, we're at Developerweek right now. Let's say that someone 3 months before this fine event, they came to us and they said, I want to build out an application that can connect people at the conference. And potentially an application also where people can message each other, where people can blog about what they've been doing recently, a place where people can post videos and lightning talks about what they've been doing recently. I want to build this application. How long will it take to build? Right? It's really difficult to know exactly where the focus is for that product. And what I equate it to typically is a study that was conducted by Elizabeth Newton in 1990 called the Tapping Study. And what she uncovered was the curse of knowledge. So she took a bunch of testers into a room and she said to them, okay, I'm going to pair you with someone else, another test subject, and I'm going to give you a list of pretty well-known songs. Things like Happy Birthday, Star Spangled Banner, and I would like you to tap on the table the rhythm of that song, and the other person that you're in this test with, they'll guess what song you're tapping. So you say, happy birthday to you, and you'd see if the other person would guess the song you were tapping. She asked the test subjects, before they started tapping out those songs, how many songs they thought the other person would guess. And they guessed roughly 50%. They thought roughly 50% of people will guess the song that I'm tapping. The number of people who actually correctly guessed the songs was actually 2.5% of the testers. The reason is that when you're tapping out the song, you're singing it in your own head. And so you are assuming that the other person hears it too. What the other person hears is a bunch of incoherent taps on the table. It's very similar when you're building out a product. If you've been deep in your understanding of this product and you really know it to its core, when you come into the room with your team and you're trying to explain to your engineering team, your design team, your product team, here's what we're actually going to do, typically what you'll do is you'll start spending more time on those edge cases rather than the core functionality of the application. So the very first thing you need to do when talking about estimating for a product is talk about what is that primary goal that we're targeting for this product. So in the case of an application for Developerweek, the primary goal could be just to connect people at Developerweek. A blog, a place to message, a place to post video content, that might be a list of additional features that we could build. The core goal of this application is to connect people at Developerweek. Outline your risks that are associated with this application. So if you were to fail, how would you fail? Be really upfront about this and have those conversations early. And then list out the assumptions that you're making. Are we assuming that people want to connect with each other at Developerweek? Do people just want to come and listen to the talks and then go home and not actually talk to anyone at Developerweek? That's an assumption that we're making in making this application. So that's the first step of the process. Align your team, have a really good picture of that end goal product that you're building. Second step of the process is prioritizing your workflows. By the way, I'm very much of a 90s kid, so you'll notice the movies here directly relate. Do you guys know what movie this is? Home Alone. He's prioritizing his workflow here. He's building out his battle plan. So this is still keeping our application on a very high level. What we're going to do here is we're going to list out a list of our workflows. Workflows are collections of user stories. They're slightly different than sprints or epics because they actually can vary in length or technical difficulty. But they relate in the sense that they're kind of a chunk of functionality that a user would go through as they go through your application flow. List out those workflows. They're typically going to be 10 to 15 workflows, and then you're going to prioritize them. A method that we use for prioritization is the functional feature analysis, if any of you have seen that before. It is ranking the workflows based on value to the company. So we rank value to the company. We all vote on this. Very similar to playing poker, we vote value to the company, 1 through 5. We then vote on value to the user. How valuable is this workflow to the end user, 1 through 5. And then we vote on technical feasibility. Typically, we only have our engineers voting on technical feasibility, and I guess you can assume why. And that actually is a little bit different, counterintuitive, 1 being the most difficult to build, 5 being the least difficult. You sum up those numbers for each of your workflows, you rank them top to bottom, and that gives you a pretty good picture of your prioritization, how you want to start thinking about how you'll go about building your MVP. Third step of the process, and arguably a very important step of the process, is making sure to use estimate ranges. Lovely movie here. Anyone? Forrest Gump. Estimates are like a box of chocolates. You never know exactly how long it will take. So that's why we use ranges, especially at this early stage. Going back to Boehm's cone of uncertainty, in those early stages of development, you need to use those ranges because there will be room for variability in the sense that the estimate that you're putting on the page right now probably isn't going to be exactly right, but somewhere around that estimate probably will be. So the way that we do ranges is we first estimate based on perfect developer days. So we take those workflows, we break them down into user stories. So using the example of the Developerweek application, one workflow might be, as a user, I would like to have the ability to create an account, log in, update my password, etc. The individual user stories associated with that workflow is, as a user, I'd like to be able to create an account with my email and password. As a user, I would like to be able to update my password by saying I forgot my password. As a user, I'd like to have the ability to log in. As a user, I'd like to have the ability to see if my password didn't hit all criteria, what those criteria are, right? Several different user stories in there. We estimate for each of those user stories if you were as productive as possible, if you didn't have any buts associated with that story. And what I mean is, well, I could build this story in 2 days, but I haven't read the API documentation, so I don't really know. I could build this story in 2 days, but I haven't gotten the designs yet, so I don't really know how complex the designs are going to be. When you're estimating in terms of perfect developer days, just use that estimate before the buts. So say, okay, this story would take me about 2 days if I were working perfectly, if there weren't any extraneous unknowns that are popping up for this project. You then account for those known unknowns in your certainty index. So your certainty is going to be a percentage point. And at the beginning stages of a project like this, they're going to be pretty low, most likely, for some of these user stories. So you might say, this story will take me 2 days, but I'm only 50% certain that it will take me 2 days. You're accounting for the known unknowns, you're accounting for the uncertainty at the early stage of the product. This might be before you have designs, this might be before you've dug into the API documentation. We typically also just add a metric for noise. It's something good to remember when you're estimating out that you probably want to estimate in noise for daily stand-ups, IPMs, meetings with the client, demos. Make sure to account that into your estimate. Anyone for this movie? This is a harder one. Thomas Crown Affair. So this is the part where we start to make estimation agile. Is we set a plan and we have a pretty good sequence of events to go through to make sure the MVP that we're ultimately bringing to market, it has all of those user stories associated with it that it needs to have in order to be functional enough and provide value to the end user. The way that we do this is, rather than taking all of those estimated user stories that are going to look like a big long laundry list, summing up the estimate of all those, and giving the client the range for every single user story that you've outlined. So, this whole project is going to take anywhere between 12 to 14 weeks to build. What that's doing is that's creating a mindset of waterfall. To keep it agile, you want to break those user stories down into different columns of prioritization. So the columns that we use are priority 1. Those are the user stories that you absolutely need to have in your MVP in order for it to be functional. So in the case of our application that we're building for Developerweek, if a user can't create an account, probably won't work, right? So we need to include the user story of, as a user, I need to have the ability to create an account. That's a need-to-have story that goes into your priority 1 column. You then have your priority 2 column, and those are the nice-to-haves. Those are stories that probably should be included in your MVP, but if they're not included, it's not the end of the world. So an example of that is, as a user, I need to be able to update my password if I forgot it. Probably would be good to include it because I don't want the staff here to be inundated by emails saying I forgot my password, I need to log back in. But you know what, if it drops out because the scope ballooned in other places, that might be okay. It might be okay, right? It's one that's okay to drop. And then finally, you have your priority 3 column. Those are stories that are they can wait until after launch. Something like, as a user, I would like to be notified exactly what I got wrong in my password. Did I not have enough characters, or did I not include a number when entering in a password when creating an account? That's a story that we might say, that's like your icebox, it's saying, we should do this at a later point, but we feel very comfortable launching without it. What this allows you to do is when you kick off product development, your product naturally, as we all know, working in an agile fashion, will change. You'll learn more, scope will change in certain areas, and what this allows you to do is your team now can say, as you add in scope in certain areas of the application, okay, well, what user stories are we going to drop from priority 2 so that we can bring in this additional scope? When we think about launching the MVP, typically what we encourage clients to look at in terms of their estimate range is the estimate to build out priority 1 and priority 2. That gets you into a lean startup mentality of we're going to launch before we're fully comfortable launching because we need to get it into the end user's hands. But it also allows you to have those priority 2 stories that can change and fluctuate given the change of your project priorities as you go along in this project. All right, so now we have a pretty good list of how long, we have a good range in terms of how long it will take us to build out priority 1 and priority 2 stories. We kick off development. Does that mean that we just have that estimate in mind and we're done with estimation? No, it doesn't mean that. So the key with estimation is to revisit these estimates as you go along in your project. The thing to keep in mind, though, is don't tie these estimates to your user stories in your tracker tool of choice. So we all know the pitfalls of saying in a specific user story in your tracker when you're planning for a sprint, this story will take 1 day. If the engineer who's working on it, if it ends up taking them less time, it's very easy to balloon scope, refactor the code in unnecessary ways to hit a day in terms of the estimate. If it's looking like they can't hit the estimate, if they can't hit that day, then they actually will start cutting corners, dropping things like tests, which is not what we want to happen. So when you're tracking your user stories in your sprint planning, your weekly planning, and your daily stand-ups in that tracker tool, make sure to continue to use pointing and velocity to track your team over that sprint planning process. But come and revisit these estimates. These should almost be like, this is like your business planning spreadsheet that you work with the product owners on. Make sure to revisit this I like to revisit it on about a monthly basis to make sure that we're on track with development. And that's the process. I have to give a really big shout out to Warren Davey. He taught me most of what I know about estimation. Agile Estimating and Planning is a fantastic book as well. And then Agile Estimates is actually a project that I've been working on with my good friend Chefi Menda, and you can access that today. That gives you the ability to actually enter in these user stories into individual cards and then move them in between those columns. I will warn you that there are only 2 columns today. That is in our own backlog to create the 3 columns of priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. And that's it. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. I think we have a little time for questions.
About 7 minutes if you want to do Q&A.
Awesome, cool. Any questions?